to a degree of excellence that won them all the gazillion awards that you guys are aware of. And the one thing that I felt most proud of, and we all experienced it last year, was our kind of moment of dismay and disbelief, and the kind of idea that, what can you do? How can you resist? And here's a prime example of how you resist. Go and design the Obama Presidential Library. Okay, so I would like to invite everybody up to sit there. Please, the panel and the panelist and moderator. So here's your panel. Remember, those of you who are getting educational, you can sign up with the form for both the IBC and the units. And here's the things that you need to know. So memorize it for a quiz later. Okay. Virginia Fratello. Most of you probably know who she is. Her partner with Rael and the excellent work that they've been doing, many award-winning projects and stuff. But emerging objects is one of the things that they have started. And Virginia said to me, it's a make tank. It's not a think tank. I'll let the thinking be done by someone else. I call that same thing. I think that the main thing is that their work and also their teaching, both of them are assisted. Actually, Ron is teaching at Berkeley, and you are the director of interior design at San Jose State. So one of the things I asked them earlier, I have to put my glasses to see this. Is to tie back into last night about book, movies, and art. Virginia's favorite book is Dust by Joseph Amato. Her favorite artist, which just rolled off her tongue, is Donald Trump. So welcome, Virginia.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to be here today to have this opportunity to share some new work and research with you. When I learned I was in the panel called Flavorings, I decided to take this quite literally. So I want to talk about food and flavor today. Flavor, the distinctive or essential quality of something, the character, tone, or essence. We all understand how the flavor of food can bring out strong emotions. It can satisfy us, and it can bring us great pleasure and displeasure. And because flavor is connected to our sense of smell, it can also evoke memories and associations that purely visual information cannot do. Flavorings can alter or enhance what was once plain, be seasoned, or spiced up to be different, stronger, even more distinct. And the gradient or ombre of flavor has the potential to add complexity and richness. It can take us from sweet to bitter in a single bite or view. It can serve a function such as to protect, like the icing on top of a cake. And it can smoothly move us from one geographical terrain to another in a single object or space. It can tell a story. So I'm going to talk about material ombres and flavoring today. And while I'm doing that, I'd like to offer you a material ombre chocolate covered espresso bean to savor. And I hope as you enjoy the beans, you take the time to think about how the gradient from light to dark, or from white chocolate to dark chocolate, takes you from sweet to bitter. And I'm going to talk about material ombres in this presentation, but before I do, I think it's essential to talk about flavoring itself and how objects of the built interior can quite literally be flavored by their inherent materiality. So before I get started, the chocolate covered espresso beans. This will also keep you awake while I talk.
Yes, you need a mic.
Because of the light and art. Sorry.
So materials such as coffee flour have the ability to be transformed through the leading technology of 3D printing. The production and consumption of coffee offers many opportunities to harvest waste. Starting in the field where the coffee beans are picked, one finds the first opportunity. The coffee bean can be found at the center of the coffee tree's fruit, or cherry as it's called. The coffee bean goes through a process of drying or washing as it's separated from the cherry's pulp and outer skin. The bean continues along the path to roasting, but the cherry becomes a waste product of coffee. It often gets dumped into rivers or left to rot in heaps. Coffee flour, however, is a new product that's being made by collecting, drying, and pulverizing those same cherries into a powder that is certainly edible, but also has excellent 3D printing capabilities, as evidenced here in these flavorful and aromatic 3D printed coffee cups. Materials such as sugar can also be 3D printed quite easily. Because of sugar's inherent solubility and stickiness, it's possible to 3D print the sweetest confections. In this case, sugar spoons are printed in volumes corresponding to 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, 1 tablespoon, and beyond. The 3D printed sugar spoons can be stirred down and dissolved into one's coffee to flavor it with sweetness. One can also find tea waste being generated in the field during production and post-consumption, similar to coffee. Tea can be shaped for functional uses, as seen in these quite literal teaspoons. These teaspoons are flavored with sugar and lemon. As they dissolve in hot water, they become fragrant with a syrupy aroma of herbs. And of course, there are teacups and a teapot, specifically the Utah teapot. This teapot was modeled and created in 1975 by early computer graphics researcher Martin Newell, who was a member of the pioneering graphics program at the University of Utah. It was one of the earliest objects ever 3D modeled and visualized on a computer screen, so it's only appropriate that it be brought back into the physical world through 3D printing with tea. The Utah tea set. Pomace is the solid remains of grapes after pressing the fruit to make wine. It contains the skins, pulp, seeds, and stems of the fruit. Grape pomace has traditionally been used to produce brandies such as grappa, which the Italians have done for thousands of years. And today, pomace is mostly used as fodder and fertilizer in the United States. But much like the coffee cherry, grape skins and seeds also have the potential to be dried and ground into a fine powder for 3D printing. Wine goblets, 3D printed in Chardonnay. This is a Chardonnay building block. It's been radial arrayed here 7 times to make an ice bucket for Pierre Jouvet. 3D printed and formed into objects that we're familiar with, such as 3D printed salt shakers. And it can be formed into flavorful building blocks of the future. 3D printed salt has optical properties of translucency. The salt blocks can be shaped into forms that are otherwise impossible to make with molds. Techniques for interlocking and stacking 3D printed salt blocks have been explored, and the 3D printed salt also has structural properties. Salt has been industrially harvested in the San Francisco Bay Area for over 150 years. At its peak, the Bay had 40,000 acres of land dedicated to salt production and produced over 1.3 million tons of salt annually. The solar salt works in the San Francisco Bay uses only natural power from the sun and the wind to annually farm salt crops. And currently, each fall, 150,000 tons of salt are harvested from the Bay. So this is this year's crop. The company that owns the crystallizers in the Bay has given or sold 16,500 acres of land to the government for wildlife redevelopment, and an additional 1,400 acres has been slated for residential development of 12,000 homes for 30,000 people, which raises the question, does salt have the potential to be an integral material resource for this housing development should it happen? So to explore this idea, we created a salty glue, kind of igloo made of salt and glue. And we were inspired by traditional forms and the salt extraction process that has occurred for thousands of years. And we designed individual tiles using crystalline forms reminiscent of the salt itself to create a savory enclosure made of salt, intended to preserve and enhance the role of the interior enclosure and the concept of building using the ground beneath your feet. Salt has been farmed and harvested from the Bay. Salt has been farmed and harvested from the Bay, and it's purely white. However, in other parts of the world, such as the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, salt is formed naturally. The salt in the salar has a material gradient, one that speaks to time and climate. The darkest browns within the ombre from light to dark indicate the rainy season. When the rain falls on the salar, it sits on top of the previous year's salt. Sediment lands on the wet surface, and over time, as the annual rainfall evaporates, the salt slowly turns white again. Thicker bands of white indicate years with greater rainfall, and thinner bands or more frequent gradients indicate years with lesser rainfall. A salt brick from the salar takes several years to make, but it's possible to read the history of local climate within the blocks, which are used to construct local buildings. Each local building is flavored by the salt and speaks to the history of precipitation in an otherwise very dry environment. So instead of making this, I wondered if we could make this. Would it be possible to 3D print material ombres for the built environment? And if so, what story would they tell? How could we move seamlessly from one material to another? And how does that enhance our understanding or perception of material, color, culture, or even pleasure? So to begin this research of creating material ombres, using 3D printed, I started with Chardonnay and cement. Cement being the most ubiquitous building material used in construction, and Chardonnay being an abundant local agricultural byproduct close by in Napa. So I started this research by printing tiles in cement, which you see at the bottom of the photograph, and tiles in Chardonnay, and then mixing the Chardonnay and cement in order to make fiber tiles. And this allowed me to move across a large surface and make a gradient, but there were still joints between the different tiles, which left me unsatisfied with the solution, and pushed me to develop a formula for 3D printing with Chardonnay and cement, one that would allow for the smooth transition from an agricultural material to a geologic material without any joints, adhesive, or mechanical fasteners. control the material ombre. So much like the salt blocks of the solar deeply unique, bands of dark and light can be made, transitions can be smooth and seamless. In an attempt to create a new color, I tested curry in cement. The 3D printed curry makes for a mouth-watering object. Literally, the aroma of the curry as it is being printed pervades all of the spaces that it enters. And the 3D printed curry object can be formed into an aromatic and simultaneously functional vessel, tile, or object for the 3D printed interior. Now, I also want to talk about bad ombres. Ombres are simply bad because they don't evenly transition from light to dark, or from one material to another seamlessly, because they're abrupt, harsh, and unnatural, seemingly out of place, artificial affronts. When Donald Trump said he wanted to build a wall to keep out the bad hombres, he was referring to bad men. But what he said was bad hombres, which is something entirely different. It's something the distinct line or boundary it creates. An ombre, in fact, allows for unbroken transitions across borders and between landscapes. It crosses political boundaries fluidly and allows for continuous cultural connections to be made. So in response to Trump's bad ombre statement, we've created a collection of 3D printed vessels that smoothly transition from one material to another seamlessly. The clays used in the bad ombres come from different regions around the world. They're combined in a single tube that extrudes clay continuously using G-code, the computer language that speaks to the printer and tells it what path to take. The whitest clays are porcelain from the Matari Bay in New Zealand. The porcelain is translucent and resonant. The dark black mountain clays come from the pits in the southern parts of the United States, but they're mixed in California using a custom recipe that creates a newer, stronger body. Through the use of varying clays, the bad ombres are intended to create new geographic and geologic landscapes. They're objects that transcend borders. They're simultaneously rooted in the ground from which they emerge, but they're also global and elusive. No ombre in this collection will ever be recreated exactly the same way again. Failure, individuality, distinct character, unique markings are all what make these pieces special. Their differences make them one of a kind, but the ombre ties them together. We see these vessels as finished objects for the constructed environment, but we also see them as study models for larger architectural installations. And we're working towards the creation of building-scale printers designed for the sole production of future occupiable ombres with clay. Walls and partitions with tones of color that shade and shift into one another. We're working towards the creation of environments that have distinct flavor and materials, that move us because of their sweetness or their earthiness or their freshness. Environments that use material ombres to enhance function. For example, the lime plaster at the top of buildings in shipping protects the mud bricks at the highest elevations from erosion. The variation in increasingly dark mud plaster toward the bottom of the buildings speaks to the frequency with which the surface needs to be replastered or refrosted. Material ombres speak to time, to climate, ecology, and our awareness of nuanced needs for variation. And finally, material ombres allow us to combine disparate landscapes and geographies to easily cross borders and transition between old and new, here and there, bitter and sweet. Thank you.
said, when I asked her, what's your favorite book? And she said, Bluette. And I said, like blueberries? And she said, yeah. And it's Bluettes by Maggie Nielsen. And it kind of talks about her a little bit. Like, she is really one of our sort of maverick researchers, I would say. So briefly, you know her bio from the pamphlet, but she's been working with mediation of interior design through advertising and art, as well as art installations, television, and other medium, visual medium. And she does that actually independently, outside of the institution, to foster a language and a vocabulary for interior architecture, for interior design research to advance our discipline. She came with a Master's of Design in Material Culture from the University of Brighton, and that in itself, I thought, was already a really interesting set of education. So her title, Breathtakingly Ugly Advertising Taste in 1970s Domestic Interiors, we welcome Sylvia Faichney.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here today. This is a really exciting symposium that Woodbury University is hosting. So, like I was saying, I work with mediation of interiors. And this began with installation artwork, and now it's with advertising, and I've been looking at this for a few years now. And I'm concerned about the vocabulary and how it's easily transferable somehow. Like, we know where they are, we know how things work. What it's saying is it's a mood. So I look at these things through my research. And as a historical document, advertising, I believe, is a critical resource. These images act as testimonies regarding what was commercially accepted and socially endorsed. Historian and sociologist Angel Warnick supports this and states that, quote, imaginistic advertising may build on values, desires, and symbologies that are already out there. So that is to say that it is imagined in its being staged, but not as a possibility to exist outside of promotional culture. And so I mine through periodicals such as House and Garden for ads considering the publication's institutional authority, meaning that thousands of readers look to them to define what is popular, tasteful, and otherwise good. These ads pictured here today are taken from periodicals published originally in Great Britain during the 70s. So although many of the products were available for export to other countries, the readership was primarily in the UK. So the 1970s erupted with a quest for social and visual liberation, an effort which has been cemented within advertisements. The domestic interior followed architect Robert Venturi's claim that more is more and less is a bore, and divorced itself from the pragmatism of modernism, blossoming into an embellished landscape. However, I found that it wasn't uncommon to hear the 70s referenced as a, quote, decade that design forgot, or that taste forgot. Most poetically brutal, I believe, was that it was the breathtakingly ugly period, inspiring the first part of my title today. And I had to confront the seemingly unanimous report of 70s domestic interiors and their association to badness, which began with investigating the surface of these constructed spaces, uncovering the semiotics in which 70s domestic taste was sold, ultimately finding it rich with associations to class. Enabling the manufacturing of these new interior spaces was the advancement of synthetic fibers. As the slide indicates, new technology produced playful and flexible textiles, encouraging consumers to use these materials to drape their living rooms, patios, and as we will see shortly, bathrooms with charisma and warmth. Providing the cheap production of these materials, the advancements allowed for a proliferation of options. These synthetic synthetic materials had a goal of manifesting a simulacra of natural or original material. Initially, the materials sufficiently imitated the real thing. The shag carpet might not have been made out of wool, but the acrylic imitation gave similar impressions, at least when we first purchased it. Manufacturing of affordable domestic goods enabled consumers to exercise a visible individualism that endorsed a postmodern idolatry style. Not unlike the advertisement of Sanderson, the textile company, displayed on the screen. The domestic interior was reintroduced to the site of consumption with a mission to reproduce an image of oneself. Rendering a domestic tableau with a lack of interest in the architectural shell, instead investing in the consumer's desire for a visually evident identity. Now, this is not the first time that the interior this has occurred, although it is the first decade that a self could and oftentimes did change from root to root. It is examined here as though Sue Sanderson, through her home, that Clark could explain and explore her decorative self. This ad emphasizes that in the 70s there was a shift in the role in the interior, which moved from expressing functionality to personality. Oftentimes, this personality was rooted in defining someone's taste. Taste is defined as a sense, both in terms of flavor and bodily flavor, which Virginia did a wonderful job at. Thank you. And as well as aesthetic judgment. The latter being concerned, at least historically and presently, with the domestic interior, and therefore mind itself. Introducing a kind of attitude towards taste in the 70s, author Penny Bradford states, quote, "Taste has become an unlimited word. For the everyday purpose of putting together a living room for your life, good taste has to be your taste." Now, accused of being forgotten, taste was indeed very present in the 70s. As Bradford and the semi-ad illustrate, quote, "People's tastes are as different as their faces." It is clear that the 70s values individualism, more so drawing taste as idiosyncratic. The notion of a material individuality is the foundation in which interior domestic taste is promoted, using self-expression as a selling point, as a thing of desire, therefore coloring taste as an object that can be built. What it doesn't underscore is that as much as the personal is an indicator of taste, so much is the cultural. In sociological discourses, taste is defined through individual, personal, and cultural patterns of choice and preference. Therefore, taste is inherently tethered to cultural associations which reinforce a binary opposition of good and bad. But how was the interior promoted and sold when it was colored with all things bad? In the September 1976 issue of Good Housekeeping, Bonsack Baths Limited published a 2-page advertisement promoting a spring green bathroom suite with the slogan, "Not science such as wealth, more way life, as well as historical purposes," which signified bathrooms and features the Bonsack Island distinctions baths, but is embellished with a silver floral wreath in which a white intrusive fashion. The other accessories on the Tsien side on the screen, such as porcelains, bars, towels, as well as dismal appearance on bathrooms in decades prior by washing itself in avocado and matching textiles. First introduced to the market in the 1960s in London, Bonsack Baths designed and produced luxury baths. Big, opulent baths available in a plethora of colors. Notably, they were one of the first luxury baths to be manufactured using plastic, making the bath roughly $700 USD, available to be made on installments, instead of the usual $1,500. The space includes novel inventions featuring bidets, vanity units, and invisible plumbing, as well as stylistic trends such as the oval corner bathtub and wall-to-wall carpet. Further, the interior utilizes signs of relaxation, setting a cool tone with the use of green and the application of luscious materials, i.e. velvet, running water, foliage, and terracotta tiles. The advertisement suggests that the construction of the self is possible through various acts of consumption. which gives the consumer/reader access to the Bonsack way of life. The advertisement projects this notion through its picturesque application of synthetic materials, providing a simulated, inexpensive experience of a sumptuous way of life. Now, there's an assumption that when purchased, Bonsack would not only enhance their bathrooms, but it would further alter the consumer's position in life and how they navigate that. It becomes a space that not only provides a function of resources, i.e. not so much bathroom, but also luxury, i.e. our way of life, consequently informing the inhabitant's social status. Bonsack confirms that when consuming certain objects that are associated with upper-class tastes, the design will associate oneself with a lifestyle of extravagance. By showcasing things that signify wealth, the ad rightly insists that the space is accessible and turns the culture understands. Pierre Bourdieu, the cultural theorist and sociologist, posits that access to capital has distinctive formal correlations which relate back to one's social status. He characterizes taste as inherently associated to forms of capital. This association is evident within the ad, given the value of the bathroom is rendered through the display of objects and how those objects were accessed. The appearance of a certain way of life through the display of certain objects is where cultural capital is revealed, a term applied by Bourdieu to define a signification system regarding how we classify classes. Cultural capital is measured by one's knowledge, experience, and connections. With the interior advertised, it is painted with value given the experience of luxury and the knowledge of how to access a desirable way of life. The interior may then be seen as an object of cultural capital, given the value of communicating a vibrant individuality and further, a platform to play out a way of life which many hope for. Subsequently, the interior in the ad is considered within positive terms of taste. Here, it is sold through an idealized dreamscape wrapped in glossy synthetic goods by distinguishing its value as a thing of upward mobility. To want something like velvet carpet in a space that is frequently wet is rooted in a desire for what velvet signifies, not necessarily for its practicality. So the reader anticipates a deposit of cultural capital once they've remixed a dismal space into a luxury bathroom, communicating signs of relaxation signifying wealth, signs which are ultimately limited to them as individuals. The plastic bath and synthetic velvet resonate visually with colloquial versions of high-cost taste. The interior's association to wealth and enjoyment are key elements to selling its worth, its tastefulness. Although a simulacrum, Bourdieu insists that, quote, the class is defined as much as it's being perceived, as much as it's being by its consumption, therefore securing the value of the interior advertised. So wealth and luxury are key factors to locating taste as a promoted, sold, and bought object, but so is referencing historical periods, mainly here, the Victorian interior. The interior represented seemingly harks back to Victorian age with its application of lush materials of plants and trinkets. In her extensive research in 20th century interiors, design historian Penny Spark has considered the domestic interior and the role that females within the Victorian period had in managing domestic space through producing an interior which reflects good taste. So we can see the Victorian interior as a woman's interior, Victorian taste, woman's taste. Although in light of modernism, what was once pronounced as good taste within the domestic vernacular was no longer such. Spark explains this by stating that, quote, objects of feminine taste in this century, the 20th century, frequently have been deemed inferior to those of high culture. The material culture of a feminine domesticity has frequently been singled out for condemnation or, at best, sarcasm, termed bad taste or kitsch. Spark enables us to locate an explanation as to how the 70s taste is labeled bad, while also alluding to how it was advertised and subsequently sold. The interiors in the 70s found a liveliness in relevantly negating the functionality of goods rather than endorsed pleasure, plush materials, and ornateness. Remixing the Victorian decor, one which neglected the Victorians' agenda to display a moral sensibility. Most pronounced within the interior is an image of a white woman in the background bathing. Her femininity is fixed within the interior, like the bath itself, and marks the space as desirable, adding to its value. Through applying upper-class, feminine, Victorian domestic predilections, the advertised interior states its value, its authority as a destination. The interior's desirability, i.e. its promotion of taste, is located in its lush, ornate, and inviting design. Now, to close, the association of taste being good or bad is antagonized with the domestic interiors of the 70s. These spaces reveal 70s taste as an object built through archaic associations of class, signifying objects and people as apparatuses of value, of upward mobility. The interiors advertised are templates which expose the intentions of interior spaces, which is to communicate a purpose, to curate an image or a lifestyle, and oftentimes an individual. The 1970s interior, although vibrant and unruly, was sold, promoted, and presumably bought, given its success in applying historically upper-class values to domestic interiors. Being as such, it proved lackluster in its agenda to challenge notions of an absolute taste. Now, there's still much more work to be done in locating the nuances of 70s design, but I can say confidently today that taste was indeed not forgotten. Thank you.
Our third and final panelist is Hunker. With her partner Corso, they have a firm called Sport Collaborative. It's a design collaborative. A couple of their recent projects include the Rael Foundation, which is an artist residency, which they were awarded in Chicago, as well as just as of last weekend, right? Museum of Contemporary Art in Santa Barbara, with this beautiful installation that we featured in our Instagram and Music for Architects. Thank you for that as well. They are both assistant professors at Syracuse University of Architecture, and they're basically one of the sort of forefront of a group of young practitioners who are really challenging the way that digital fabrication has been integrated in both the design process and the making processes. And I welcome Hunker.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be back in LA and to be here today. I want to talk today about faux real. From kitsch to faux to abstract animation, fakeness or imitation in architecture often suggests a low register of design and taste. This realm of culture generally holds strong derogatory connotations to anyone considering themselves educated in quote-unquote good taste. Yet there's something intriguing and powerful about the objects and environments in the world of fake. People really like it. Though perhaps existing in a territory of bad taste, but Taylor Nestle reminds us in his 5 Bases of Modernity that it is as if bad taste, consciously acknowledged and pursued, actually products to itself and becomes its own clear-cut opposite. Further, case studies in the unfettered protocols and material alchemy of projects that employ these techniques, from faux, real, kitsch interiors to imitating lawn ornaments to the charmingly strange folk art environment, hints at the possibilities for agency in the artificial. Many of the environments I will show this morning articulate this in-between territory through highly decorative imitation grounds, fake flora and fauna, and a latent interest in the diachronic. As Annie mentioned, Corso and I maintain a design practice called Sport unfortunately, Greg can't be here today due to a family emergency, but I'd like to present a bit about this faux real phenomenon of our research, ranging from high-fidelity emulation to abstraction, as well as recent speculations that sports has done on the potential for fakeness to amplify and distort established architectural tenets and what we understand as real. When applied to the architectural interior, faux aesthetic conditions have a particularly interesting effect. The owner of the Madonna Inn in San Luis Obispo, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, talks about wanting to offer people something beyond what they would normally expect, something that gives them a smile, something that's fun. Here you see one hotel room in the Madonna Inn called Yosemite Rock. It's really well dirty. The hotel description of this room reads, "Experience a touch of the outdoors in this park-like setting, evoking strength from native rock and harmony from nature's embrace." The rock may be real, but the environment is definitely faux. The jungle room at Graceland, Elvis's home in Memphis, Tennessee, also imitates an outdoor setting. In this case, displacing not only the location and the interior-to-exterior relationship, like the Yosemite Rock Room, but also the origin of material. And this is precisely where the power of faux exists. As Cristina Diaz-Moreno and Efrain Garcia-Rinda of the Sarah 9 Ray, rather than being something negative, the false acquires infinite value from its ambition to emulate. It is a material whose only meaning consists in faithfully reproducing an effect or sensation, devoid of technique and figuratively of origin. Because of this, material systems have importance only in relation to the altered states of perception they generate. There is an interesting distance that develops between the real and the false, particularly in cases where they are together in the same continuous environment. The fake rocks here, available on rocksfast.com for $64.99 to $795.99, depending on size and quote-unquote function, become all the more intriguing when juxtaposed with average rocks with average backyards. It is the relationship between the false objects and their environment that define not only its aesthetics, but perhaps more interestingly, its use. A cell tower on its own is not so interesting, but a tree that is actually a cell tower is very interesting. Here, the quote-unquote function of both the tree and cell tower have been compromised, and perhaps this new object has developed new, unfamiliar uses and effects beyond those focused on providing cellular service. These are quote-unquote new trees, or invasive species, as Robert Boyd and Dylan Marsh's photography series titles posit. The false develops new agency in these environments. Not only different use or function, and of course entirely different qualities of interior and exterior, of massiveness, of thickness, etc., but due to its ambition to emulate, and in these cases emulate rather poorly, the surrounding fabric is destabilized. Archigram's log plug project is of obvious interest here, though not particularly for its electronic or bionic quality, but rather for an aesthetic one. Though the notion of the typical simulation log is perhaps for them a projection of a future banality, for us it is an idea imbued with both the obvious kitsch or bad taste qualities of inherent to imitation objects of this type, but also a tantalizing challenge of perception and engagement. Our interest here is how typical simulation objects, logs, rocks, and even fauna, like resin deer statues or plastic flamingos, alter states of perception in their deployment into the contemporary environment. Specifically with fake fauna, there seems to be correctness and incorrectness between alive and the faux real. The systems guiding the design, preservation, and renovation of natural history museum dioramas further capitalize on materials that are so sophisticated with imitation that the trick of the false is almost entirely complete, other than the scene's unchanging position. So water gets replaced with quote-unquote simulated water, serving as water perfectly in what it looks like, but developing other properties such as adhesion and solidity, and perhaps most interestingly, dryness. Water is also imitated through color, even when unintended. So while AstroTurf normally imitates grass, but better, when glue in color, even though the texture of grass is retained, it turns out that it looks perfectly like water, at least to the migratory birds of Idaho, who consistently think the Boise State Football Stadium is a lake and crash land into it, often dying in the process. I know. The blueness here develops new, different, quote-unquote, natural relationships, while the texture retains the original one. Even when using real, normal water, the effect can be faux. This interiorized tropical beach resort in Japan imitates everything with great accuracy, ultimately producing an entirely fake environment and atmosphere that brings up interesting questions of scale and envelope as it relates to this topic. So as a kind of counterpoint to these various kitsch examples of our research, which seem to be primarily interested in retaining a high level of fidelity and aesthetic resemblance, we looked at a series of folk art environments for modes of abstraction and imitation. So Salvation Mountain, constructed from 1984 to 2012 by the late Leonard Knight, is a 50-foot tall, vibrant landform project in Niland, California, which I'm sure all of you are very familiar with. Here, the imitated are reconstituted in abstraction through the materials of straw, mud, and most importantly, paint. So flower gardens are abstractly constructed by hand into colorful lumps, while waterfalls are delineated with abstract blue and white stripes. While the result is a patchwork of fantastical garden elements, the paint duly functions as a necessary and intentional binding agent for the fragile dirt and paint monument. Due to its innumerable coats over the last few decades, the paint is both structural as well as cosmetic. The emulation becomes its means of existence. And while the project is full of natural elements that are imitated in other false materials, like the flower garden and the waterfall, there are also natural or organic elements that are made artificial through the cosmetic augmentation. The craft is questionable and visually fragile, and the true feat of the project is amplified by its ability to show how unlikely it was to exist. It challenges the idea well established by the kitsch examples just shown, that craft and technique could be considered precious and absolute, and advocates instead for a captivating looseness in the creation of a fake world. Relatedly, Prophet Isaiah's Second Coming house in Niagara Falls, New York, utilizes an excess of painted wood and rock elements to generate a thickened front facade and fake garden. The facade of the house, and more interestingly to us, the front yard, is vibrantly and irrepressibly adorned with colored and patterned wood planes, painted rocks, and silk flowers, so that, according to Isaiah, it may perform as a beacon for spirits as they are thrust towards Niagara Falls during the second coming of Christ. The front yard has been redefined with a dense and excessive combination of kitsch falseness, so trying to emulate closely, abstract falseness, like in this example, the sticks kind of as flowers, and the real transformed to the faux through cosmetic augmentation in the case of the painted rock. So to explore how one might combine these various definitions of the faux in a contemporary architectural project, Sports recently designed to build a pavilion for the Museum of Contemporary Art Santa Barbara that was basically made of fake air. So the question of what does air look like, luckily is not relevant. The air of Santa Barbara, much like LA, is palpable. Caused by heat and beach fog, the air itself is super visible, and it also changes the way that buildings and other objects in the urban fabric and landscape look by erasing their edges. In my teaching, I've been having students speculate on how to draw this kind of air. The notion that the way in which hatch and line work could emulate air conditions in these drawings became of great interest here. So ultimately, we became interested in envisioning the pavilion as a collection of objects whose physicality could be blurred into the air. Or, perhaps argued another way, we were interested in producing objects that faked the air of its context, but turning the volume way up on how it's imitated. While trying to blur the air, it's also trying to be seen. So in these design research drawings that I'm showing, we were testing linework thickness, density, angle, and overlap to produce those kinds of effects of the faked air. And then to establish a material strategy that operated like those drawings, we needed to develop porous volumes and blur the registration of those volumes' geometry by constructing them from many, many elements. The project is made of thousands of colored linear elements that develop a saturated haze individually and can overlap with one another. The effect is further heightened also by the inherent blurriness or haziness of this type of material construction. So we were interested in an effect that at once reinforced and dissolved the geometry of the individual object, destabilizing the solidity and clarity of the single object in favor of the haze of the collection. So the project will be installed in 6 different locations in at least 3 different neighborhoods during its 2-year lifespan in Santa Barbara. Its first home was on Stearns Wharf, where it was installed a couple of weeks ago, and in mid-April it will be installed in Isla Vista. Essentially acting as an urban exhibition of an object collection. As a whole, the project is intended to decorate the various landscapes of Santa Barbara in a new way with each move, while at the same time dissolving into nothing more than a colored haze. By privileging this visual and atmospheric effect, the project critically implicates ideas of representation, materiality, and the faux. So, to consider these ideas at a larger scale, we are currently working on a series of unsolicited proposals for a California Department of Transportation rest areas along the line. So this is a bit of a work in progress, so we'll see how this goes. But rest areas are ideal as a project through which to explore this topic because they tap into the history of imitation objects and environments of roadside attractions. The question really is, how do we learn from the popularity and delight of the roadside attraction, particularly in its relationship to quality of imitation, but other things also, to redefine how one engages with a relatively isolated rest area along an interstate, and how that in turn develops a new relationship with the landscape beyond the rest area. So our first site for this design series, which is called the Heart of Gold series, is the Button Willow Rest Area near Bakersfield, an island of irrigated land with decorative plants and trees and surfaces of grass in the middle of the Central Valley agricultural landscape. The second and third sites are the Coalinga Avenal Rest Stop near Azalea and the John Chuck Erica Rest Area near Fresno. Each of the 3 rest areas are similar in scale and layout and share the same program, which is limited to bathrooms, covered picnic areas, decorative landscape, and a small information kiosk. And in the fashion of many states' rest area or travel center programs, the buildings, insofar as they can be defined as that, are identical from site to site. So the Heart of Gold series develops many of the points that I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, so highly decorative imitation grounds, fake flora, and an interest in the dioramic. Each of the 3 schemes tests out a limited set of imitation elements in order to assess relative success or failure in a focused setting. So the Button Willow scheme deploys colorful soft lumps and zigzagging vertical elements throughout a somewhat lumpy landscape with an ever-changing colorful gradient. The building is a simple juxtaposition to the excessive and overly saturated fake landscape that surrounds it and becomes defined more by the landscape and its relationship to the building surfaces than any inherent design agenda of its own. In their ultra-fakeness, so doubling down on the faux, our proposals not only resuscitate the potential of the rest area to perform as a roadside attraction rather than mere convenience, but also redefine our relationship to the surrounding California Central Valley landscape. The Coalinga Avenal Rest Area proposal deploys a textured and faceted groundscape and tops it with imitation elliptical pools, thick patches of vertical linear elements, and lumpy football-shaped collections. These elements explore familiar landscape objects through new forms, shapes, scales, colors, and material qualities. The faux in these proposals does not exist with high fidelity to the reference objects, but rather with a degree of abstraction while also retaining some level of legibility. The third rest area for the John Erica Rest Area site considers the potential of decorative landscape objects, both clear, clean, and organized, and also messy and matted, clustering about perfectly round ground platforms. Here, the looseness observed in the folk art environments becomes critical as a way to relate back to the systems of nature by imitation. Ultimately, while exploring the relationships between both rest area and roadside attraction, also relationships between building and landscape, the designs also critically consider the relationship between the existing contemporary landscape and alternate taste systems associated with the faux. Unlike the beautiful and elegant intentions of the contemporary digital project, the Heart of Gold series advocates for a combination of the faux real kitsch imitation with folk art exuberance and looseness to produce an attitude of faux that is somewhat messy, quirky, cute, and interesting. Thank you.
Presentations. Thank you so much. It's great to sit up here as four women too. But I did, during the discussion, try to pull together some questions, one for each of you, and then maybe it can extend from there. But what I also did prior to that was to try to think of what your flavors might be. So I will start with Virginia. So this is not knowing anything about what you were going to do other than small amount. I decided the flavor was turmeric, which was very strange because then there was the curry pots there, and I decided it was turmeric because it's a spice that's very hard actually to pinpoint, but then it can be very, very earthy and have a kind of color range to it too. I'm going to go through all three of them, yes. And you can address or rebut my choice. For Molly, I decided that your flavor would be cinnamon because it's apparently sweet, but if you have a little too much of it in your mouth, it also has a bite. For Sylvia, I decided your flavor was licorice, and that's because I think of licorice as being dark and a little sly. Okay. So, I'm trying to read my notes here. For Virginia, then, same order. My first question has to do with, well, first of all, in that admiration for this idea of ombre and the sort of transition in the process of 3D printing to bring in potentially other textures and other colors. I mean, the thing that's always puzzled me about 3D printing is that the material, the form is so much the powerful generator, and the materiality has always been very much left behind. So this idea of trying to understand how the material can be brought in with 3D printing is really interesting. But do you think, I have two questions. One is, how broad do you think the sort of switch in materials can be within one generation, with one sort of 3D printing? And the other is the possibility of 3D printing in many different kinds of materials and then assembling them.
I think it's definitely possible to 3D print many different materials. Right now, we're only limited by just time. I can only spend 70 hours a day in front of a printer, but I can walk down the street and think, wouldn't it be amazing to print with this recycled rubber tires or sand from the beach or for example. So I don't think there's any limit there. There are limits of scale, and I'm confined by the build dimensions of the 3D printer, which right now are only 8 inches by 8 inches by 10 inches. And that's why a lot of the objects you saw are small, or the larger forms are made of many different 3D printed components. So sometimes we'll print 3,000 pieces and we're going to make a larger structure. And so certainly different materials can be printed and put together immersive environments that are composed of different 3D printed materials. And moving in this direction of putting more than one material in a print bed is potentially exciting. I feel like I need a bigger printer, right? So that I can print, and that's what we're working on. We saw at the very end this large clay printer that can print the size of a room, so that we could move from one material to another at the scale of the interior, or at the scale of architecture. But we're not there yet.
What about thickness? Is it always, I mean, can things be very, very thick? I mean, stone is very thick.
Sure. I think thinness is the constraint. Things can be as thick as walls. So yeah, I think that's not a problem. But the problem is the dimension of the printer itself. And then of course once you scale up, there's this question of lifting things, right? So right now, all of the things we make, you could go with your hands and anybody can put them together. My 7-year-old son can put them together. And that's also desirable because then it means you can use common material like coffee grounds and someone who has no skill in making things can put them together. It becomes very accessible in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I see its application so much in the making of objects and the making of things that are assembled. And it's still very hard to see it in the making of actual space, of actual buildings.
Yeah, as a single.
And how one would enjoy something that it feels so seamless. I mean, I think our lives are made of things that are assembled. And so something, even if it changes its material quality, but it's still seamless. I mean, that's a kind of different way of living. It's a little bit like your bathtub environment. It's kind of seamless sort of situation. I'm going to just shift for a minute to you, Sylvia. As I was looking at the images from the 70s, I was wondering whether you think people, I mean, have things really changed? It's really the method of deliberating a kind of identity of interiors and an identity of self. So now, is it any different with housewives of ... or Instagram or Kardashian West? And will interesting critics be looking at poring over Instagram and then sort of showing these things and seeing them as a kind of from a stance of kind of irony looking back?
I don't know, things have not changed. The interior of the 70s was not visually it was new, but it was doing similar things. You're replacing objects that were meant to reflect you, curate you. And I think Instagram does that in a really interesting way. It's literally snapshots that are meant to build this world that you live in.
And define your taste.
And define your taste and your personality. But it's all surface deep, and it's all meant to illustrate these kind of hidden truths, or that we want, information that we want people to see. I think the 70s, in its essence, allowed for a different group of people to do that in a much more flexible and playful way. And I'm talking about, of course, the middle class people. And that's why it's really special. And now, of course, it's the same. I don't know anybody that doesn't, well, I do know people that don't use Instagram, but it's, I don't know, there are a few people. Yes. But arguably, it's just completely saturated in our lives.
Okay, I will move to Molly. And I do think your work has a kind of a bite to it, although it is very, very beautiful. And I guess my question is, in the past, generally faux is always trying to reproduce something that's identifiable to people. So it's a dinosaur, it's a rock. And when you're now talking about the faux, you're making faux of something much more abstract. And is it still faux when it's abstract faux, or is it simply abstract?
Yeah, I don't think I know the answer to that. The terminology within this realm is super tricky, I think. Everything's in quotes, right? With kitsch, everything is always in quotes. Nothing is like, famously, it's like, it's not a lamp, it's a quote-unquote lamp, right? So I think the terminology maybe is something we're still sort of exploring, but I think we're interested in that whole spectrum of the super high fidelity emulation that to me has to, goes back to questions of materiality and technique, all the way to something that is a much more abstract emulation that retains certain legibilities of, let's say, culturally recognizable artifacts, but takes it far enough away from that thing that you're not trying to reproduce the kind of the symbol of that thing. It's just about kind of producing engagement and changing perception. So I think, so I don't know the answer to your question, but I think that that's sort of the territory that we're interested in mining and seeing how that produces a sort of resonance with a much broader audience of architecture. And ultimately, our work is really interested in engagement and broadening our audience. So what are ways in which you can retain a certain amount of legibility that get people interested and get people into it, while at the same time not actually reproducing kitsch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's kind of like a faux stepping stone from which you're launching yourself into space.
Sure.
Are there questions from the audience? Susan?
I have a couple. For Virginia, you're doing a lot of exploration of materials, and it's really interesting to see how you kind of reclaim things that just were refuse or something and making them into a material of 3D printing. How do you, it must be changing your idea of what we consider noble materials or good materials. Can you explain a little bit about your knowledge about material discovery as you go through your research?
Sure. We actually call our materials unnatural materials because they are materials that frequently, of course, come from nature. And we use them as architects and interior designers in a certain way and have certain properties. But when you take sawdust from landfill and you use that powder and combine it with a binder and you print it at 2 millimeters thick, it has new properties that are unnatural. It's suddenly translucent, right? Or depending on how you put the sawdust in the printer or the model in the printer, think about how it's going to be printed. We get a new fake grain, depending on the orientation of the object in the printer, which is unnatural. And so we're taking these materials, repurposing them, and thinking about new ways of utilizing them depending on their new properties.
So I also have a question for Molly. So the kind of four things that you showed elicited a lot of chuckle in the audience, which is a kind of knowing designer chuckle. And what's interesting about them is that all those things that you showed are kind of fun and induce a smile on anybody's face. And are you losing that smile when you interpret the form in a more abstracted manner? It's a difficult thing because there's very few things that we smile at in the built environment. And I really do believe we should smile more. So, Molly, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the approach that Greg and I take is very much about, or is interested, I guess, in inciting delight and sort of curiosity in built environment. And so that's something we focus on a lot. So many, maybe almost all of the references that we kind of return to in our research are these things that sort of are fun and funny and cute and interesting. And so I think we're conscious of that. At the same time, we're conscious of I think think it's Susan Sontag talks about in her essay on camp. She talks about as soon as it's a kind of conscious production of camp, it's no longer camp, right? Or kitsch obviously is that way as well. So I think what's interesting to us is tapping into, not reproducing those things, but tapping into the ways in which they engage people, the delight that they incite, the power that they have over people. So, in our audience today, maybe people who like that, it's almost a kind of ironic like, or it's a sort of intellectual academic like. But I read that 1 in every 20 American homes has a copy of a Thomas Kincaid painting, for instance, which is sort of.
How is that possible?
So this is kind of the whole point, is that there is, and it's about taste, it's about the kind of construction of taste through various cultural systems, but there are people like these things, sort of a broad audience likes these things, and so how do we as architects get involved in that conversation more radically so that we can engage with that broader audience and maybe do it through fun, cute things.
So is your thinking that you're going to bridge the us and them attitudes, because we have the design community here, we have the large, massive unwashed there, and so there's, it just feels like that segregation is not of the 21st century anymore.
Right. We don't think of it that way. We think of it more as just generally having a broad and interdisciplinary audience for architecture. So we're not just talking to other architects, we're not just talking to other academics, but we're trying to engage anyone, everyone in an equally valuable discussion.
Okay, 2 questions. I guess first row, second row.
Yes. It's interesting, this focus on the celebration of the fake or the kitsch. It's kind of a mannerist position, not unlike what Venturi did, starting in the 60s. And I'm just wondering, now that we are in the era of fake news, we can see the effects of that on the population. Do you see any connection there? Because obviously the release of fake news, whether it's done oftentimes with great intention, it's not funny anymore. And so I'm just wondering if you want to comment.
I hadn't thought about that for just like a minute. I think that, I forget exactly who said this, but kitsch has been sort of accused of manipulating our emotions, being very manipulative. It has these really kind of negative connotations of sentimentality and these kinds of things, and I think you could say the same about faux and sort of things housed within imitation, that they're tricking us, right? And I think that is, in this current political situation, something to kind of reconsider. We don't have a strong political position other than what I was just talking about accepting our audience. And this is a question that's come up in the last couple of months. More radically, for sure, and I don't think that we have an answer yet I think we're interested in terms of the faux and the fake in architecture. I think we're interested in the trick, and we're interested in the reveal, and we're interested in the way that those things actually allow for a destabilizing of the other environment, such that you see things new in a sort of new way. How that relates to fake news and alternative facts and the current political climate, I don't think we've totally unpacked yet. It seems, super conflicted territory, of course.
Okay, second row.
Then another second row. What an enjoyable morning this has been. Thank you all so
Later, you want? I would think dark chocolate. Kind of sweet, it's delicious. There's a little something that's sharp to it. Thank you. Okay, next, second row.
Hi, is it on? Great presentation, all three of you. And, the commonality here is, I see that we live and always live in a parallel universe where there's a part of our society that sees the world one way, and, there's mainstream society that, sees it another. And, looking at pho has always been looked at as kitsch, and today, we kind of turned it around that pho is in a way saving our precious environment. I mean, faux fur has seen a resurgence, and the idea of taking material and reprocessing it for a new purpose and creating a new life is very much a spiritual part. And looking back at the 70s, there was very much a parallel universe. At that time, I had gone to the New Domestic Landscape exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art that was curated by Amelia Kumbaz. And it all talked about a new world that created new materials, and it was really an opposite view of the world of what you were showing in your slide at bathroom. Although the aspirations were the same, the journey was different. So the question to the three panelists is, where do you see this going? I mean, with social media and the connectivity of the world today, changes happen rapidly. So where do you see these movements going?
Great. So, what do I love to do? No. There is some really cool things happening with synthetic fibers. I think what I love about, and what I think is the most important thing about talking about historical design periods is looking at the ways that people have said that they failed. And one of those is that the sustainability of a lot of the products that were available for mass consumption, affordable mass consumption, I should say, the longevity wasn't there, right? And so I think what's been great recently that's come out is there's been this emphasis on how to produce synthetic materials that will, rather than hinder our environment and fail, they'll maybe plan to fail, but in a way that won't hinder our environment, maybe help it, perhaps. We see that a lot with building plants, or even, extras like human organs from synthetic things, and bringing things to life. And the interior, specifically, has always been and is going to be rendered through various visual mediations as a dreamscape. It will always be a place that, when advertised and promoted, is something you want to walk into and be. How that gets there in actuality, maybe the bridge hasn't quite been built yet, but I think, we're getting there.
Yeah, I think that this idea of or simulation can inspire innovation, right? That it would lead you to think about how to make something new that would allow you to achieve your goals. And I also think these environments, if we're aspiring to something in an advertisement, or if we're laughing at something that's kitsch, it makes us happy, right? And we want to be happy. We want to have a beautiful bathroom, and we want to laugh because it physically gives us joy and makes us feel better. And so if we can aspire to beauty and fun in architecture and design, we should do it.
I think on the note of the kind of ecological side of this also, other than the fact that arts are in California. The reason California makes a lot of sense for the last project that I showed is the extensive drought, and though this year you guys have been super blessed with a ton of rain, the reality of like, what does a front yard become in LA? It's no longer grass, it's fake grass maybe, or it's rocks, or it's gravel, or it's cactus, or whatever. That this is a kind of opportunity to sort of reinterpret what landscape is, and what landscape to building relationship is. And in so doing, I think then that project helps to sort of reimagine or kind of flip our perception of the rest of like the kind of landscape around that. So what is the sort of existing landscape versus this fake landscape, and how we understand the relationship between them?
Before I take the next question, is there a time check? Is somebody, we're supposed to finish at a certain time? Will somebody go like this?
We're ending supposedly at 11:30, which is about now.
Oh, okay.
Take
One more question?
Sorry, thank you. Talking about taste and having bad taste and good taste, obviously there's a judgment there and a supposition that there's an objective arbiter, say. And then, besides class issues, I think, as you noted, involved in taste. So if in one of those quotes, if good taste is your taste, is there any bar that seems to just kind of, if everyone's taste, if it's good taste to have, you know, Elvis on Black Velvet for the person who has that, how do you then define what taste is?
Well, great question. But to kind of rebuttal, I don't think taste can be separate from class, especially the way that it's defined. I think it's always reliant on associations towards how we navigate our education ourselves. It can be a version of your taste is what you like, but it always is reactive to things that you learn, education, your upbringing, your gender, and things that you have access to, right? So I think it's quite, I would like it to see it liberated from things in class, and taste just be this really glorious thing that everyone has, and no negative judgments, and good and bad are completely distinguished, but I'm not sure how that's done. I'd like to see it be done. I don't have the answer to that, but
Well, certainly you brought up this in your presentation, like the maybe super kind of conflicting good and bad side of taste is something that, I mean, I'm not a historian, so these historians probably will correct me, but the seems to have manifested itself most strongly during modernism, where good taste was determined by a bunch of white men, and bad taste is for men and others, so the feminine domestic interior starts to be read as like bad taste, right? And in the 60s and 70s, in certain theory that started kind of moving towards postmodernism, it's sort of opening up territory for other people and other tastes. And so I think to me that's what feels like is exciting about this discussion now is ways to open up the territory of art and architecture and design, or continue to open up this territory for new voices and not, I mean, I think the good versus bad taste, I mean, most of those quotes are sort of from middle of the last century, and for good reason. I think it's much more of a kind of in-between blended thing now. And I think that continues to happen the more that we start to kind of delve into this and incorporate them into the use of network.
Okay, any last words? I think it's absolutely appropriate that we end on the question of taste, seeing as our topic was flavorings, and I feel that it's actually a huge and very important topic, and I think that I truly believe that you're right. It is completely intertwined with class. it's interesting to imagine how it could be separated. But thank you very, very much.
To our panelists and show operator, Billie, Sylvia, Virginia, Molly. I want to say a specific thanks right here, this lady. This is Angela Anthony, who's the manager here at the Helms Arts District, really. Yeah, she's the marketing director, but she's the one who offered this venue for us and gave us all the assistance with her crew to help make this possible. So, a round of applause for her. So here's the interesting part. We're going to have a big lunch break for you, and we're going to reconvene at 1 o'clock. So the way that things are arranged out there, just so that you know what you're looking at, and the caterers will help you kind of identify it just for the different dietary needs. When you get out there, there's going to be a table, and starting from the left-hand side, there are 3 sandwich options. The first one on your left is going to be a chicken tarragon salad sandwich on hazelnut bread. The second box is going to be a turkey club on ham and meal. The third one is a fresh veggie hummus and sprouts on multi-grain. And on the extreme right, there is a salad with lettuce, blue cheese on the side, pecans, and all that other stuff. And for the non-gluten vegetarians and all the different in between hybrids. Okay? So thank you very much. Go enjoy your lunch.